Okay, evening all on Play Chess and live stream, YouTube live stream. So in game 3 of the candidates semi-final match, Bobby Fischer was playing white against Bent Larsen, so he was already 2 points leading the match. So what would happen in game 3? Okay, so Fischer kicked off with e4, and we had a Sicilian defense. We have knight f3, d6, and now an open Sicilian. d4 was played. Larsen took this, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6. Okay, so this is a classical variation of Sicilian, and Fischer actually chose bishop c4 here. So this is the Sozin attack system, bishop c4, e6. Bishop actually dropped back now to b3. So it's potentially quite dangerous on this diagonal. White will often try and liberate that bishop further, get it to be more aggressive on that diagonal with a later f4, f5 plan quite often. So that's something to bear in mind here. Bishop e7 was played. Bishop e3, so as though white's interested in casting queenside, maybe, potentially. But after castles, we don't see f3 here, we see actually f4. Now, bishop d7. Okay, so white's casting kingside now. So it looks like a very neat setup. With this bishop potentially quite dangerous with f5 in mind. One problem with f5, it gives back the e5 square, so that has to be considered as a slight downside of playing for f5 here, to be borne in mind. a6 was played, and actually we'll put on a Kh8 as well at this point, just to see any technical stuff of interest. So here f5 was actually played, quite an aggressive move, giving up that e5 square but trying to blast open this diagonal. Possibly maybe e5 is actually playable here. This wasn't played, so for example taking black's got pressure on the key central squares, so there'll be a battle of the d5 square here, but that's an interesting position. But Bent Larsen actually played a move which maybe you might think slightly passive actually. He played actually queen c8, and yeah, technically this might be considered a slight mistake, because if we look, this is an awkward configuration for a knight fork, for example. The queen is getting in the way potentially of the rooks using the c-file. It doesn't look like an ideal orthomatic Sicilian defense plan to play queen c8 here. It's just defending the e6 pawn. Clearly, he didn't want to play e5 to weaken d5. So that strategic battle, okay, has been bypassed. But the b6 square might be an issue now. Fischer actually took on e6, and then we have bishop takes e6, volunteering the light square bishop. If in this position f takes, then maybe with this pawn pinned, actually knight f5 is quite useful for white, and this is quite annoying. So here bishop f4 is quite an annoying thing, that knight and scrutiny on d6. This could get to be a big advantage for white potentially. Something like this is very, very pleasant, with d6 being quite vulnerable. If we go back in this position, so black volunteers the light square bishop, but maybe this was designed against knight f5 to be able to take on f5. But even this position seems okay for white. Bishop didn't play knight f5 though. He just took that off. So the bishop pair, sometimes this is quite a significant advantage. But here, yes, this b6 square slightly vulnerable. Fischer pounces on that with knight a4. So for the moment leaving e4 behind, but knight b6 is the key issue. And black parries that in advance with rook b8, but it still allows the annoying knight b6. So, and this is actually forcibly winning a pawn. The queen can't protect the pawn. Pawn's dropping off. Oh dear, this doesn't look like a good opening position. 15 moves in. Queen e8, the pawn is taken. So clear pawn up. King h8. And now, okay, in this position, with e4 attacked, how to defend this? Well, bishop f5 was chosen to defend e4. Okay, let's have a look at this position. If g6, then that is weakening the dark square, so maybe white can just drop this back. It doesn't have to worry about knight takes e4. This diagonal is too weak. There's some other issues going on here. It looks like the king is pretty badly exposed. Say like this is pretty dangerous. So here, yeah, black doesn't want to play g6. He'll be weakening, potentially fatally, that diagonal. But he's a pawn down. Black played knight e5. Potentially now, is black going to get some counterplay here? Is the queen going to come out somewhere? Is going to hit e4 again with the queen, maybe? Well, against any potential danger to the e4 pawn, a nice centralizing move was played here. Queen d4, just centralizing the queen, protecting more b6. White keeps a stranglehold on this position and protects e4 in advance. So it's difficult actually to see what black is actually doing now. We see queen h5. Now knight d5. Knight takes d5, queen takes d5, otherwise bishop will be dropping off. So keeping a grip on the light squares. But it does allow seemingly aggressive move queen e2. But Fischer has this worked out. You can gain critical tempo here with bishop a7 on the rook. And now when that rook moves, now this neat move rook f2 defending with tempo c2. So he solved that problem quite neatly. He still has the bishop pair and is still a pawn up. Queen b5. Okay, so here, yes, it's just a very, very good position for white. White could simply have just taken off the queens here. This is another good move, just c3. Protecting b2 for the moment. That black exchange off queens if he wants. And that will further create a grip on the e6 square if black takes on d5 now. Yes, it's a pretty miserable game from Larsen. I mean, some of what I've read about this match is that the first two games of this match were actually higher quality than the other games. It seems a miserable effort to be a pawn down so quickly in the opening, with white having quite a dominating position now. Bishop h4, and he's trying to provoke some weaknesses. g3, Fischer obliges, but with the queens coming off potentially, does it matter to play g3? Queen takes d5, e takes. Bishop drops back. And now Fischer simply builds on the f file with rook a f1. If he gets in bishop e6, this would be a nasty pin. And he could continue with, say, bishop d4. It's a fantastic position. Nasty pin on that f file. Has black got any counterplay whatsoever here? he tries knight c4. With this move, actually, there's a potential idea of trapping the bishop for a moment with rook a8. The knight's covering this square and this square, so rook a8 might be of concern. On the other hand, what Fischer does now is pin this bishop like this, so the bishop can actually come back to d4 as well. Rook a8 was played, but the bishop drops back to d4. Now, although the bishop's pinned, a counter pin here, bishop takes d4, pinning this to double white's pawns. But white still has a dominant position and is trying to win that f file. And with the double pawns, he's also controlling that e5 square. So this knight's prospects are reduced quite significantly. Okay, so in this position, rook takes f2. Rook takes f2. Yes, still doesn't look too good here. Big advantage for white. b5. Okay, what to do to improve this position? The king comes in, king f1, g6, the knight is evicted, goes to a3, king e2. So if now, I mean, I think the king can be useful. Black tried rook a7, it's a very miserable position. If knight c2, just king d3, protecting d4. Black played rook a7. Slight weakness for the last move, f8's not covered. Rook f8 check. And now going for the d6 pawn to increase the advantage. b4, which facilitates at least knight b5 to try and hit d4. Rook takes d6, knight b5, forking. But it's double pawns, so does it matter? If white has won that d6 pawn, he's unblockaded his d pawn. He's giving up essentially a double pawn here. Knight takes d4, king d3. So we have this rook and pawn ending now emerging, because black now actually hasn't got too many options. If he moves his knight like this, white could consider not just rook takes b4, but also h4. And this is a very strong position for white. In any case, black decided to play knight takes e6. So we have this rook and pawn ending, but this is a very dangerous passed pawn. A very strong, dangerous passed pawn, this d pawn. After a5, king d4, king f7, and the king is prevented from crossing with rook e2. So white simply now is going to be herding the pawn forward, and at move 41, black actually resigned here. Larsen resigned in this position. Let's have a look. What options did he have here? Say he did want to continue with, say, a4. It doesn't really do that much. I think d6. Say takes. What is black doing? This blockade, I think, could be lifted with king c5 to c6. So this is just good enough. I think this sort of position where the blockade is not lasting long, and d7 is going to be winning. So here, this kind of position, maybe just winning this pawn is good enough for the b pawn. In fact, you can swap that passed pawn, and then the b pawn will be even easier. The king's just cut off, so maybe if not the d pawn, the b pawn. So it's a winning position. It's just technique. So yeah, after rook e2, I think it's still having adjournments anyway. So black didn't really want to play this on. Technically, it's winning with best play. Let's see. So yeah, a bit of a strange game, a strange kind of opening disaster. Let's just quickly review that again. So Fischer had played e4. We have a Sicilian, an open Sicilian from Larsen, with bishop c4. So this is one of Fischer's pet systems to have the bishop there aggressively on that diagonal. So e6, we saw the bishop dropping back. And usually black plays a6 or bishop e7. Bishop e7 was chosen here. On something like knight a5, it's not a big deal to try and collect that bishop. White's not going to worry too much about that. It's not usually played that much. It's quite a rare bird actually, only 3 games in live, but the usual move was played. So we have like a theoretical lead up here, quite well trodden. Black often has been playing a6 in this position. That's a bit rarer, bishop d7. And here actually knight takes has often been played. So maybe something went wrong in the opening. This position here is meant to be about equal. Some interesting chances for black in this variation. But what happened in the game? Where was the theoretical departure? That's my real question. Here, bishop d7. Seems black was getting a passive position already here. I think this is the critical moment where you have the weird looking queen c8. It's already quite a rare position, and it's difficult for black. I mean, the e5 is a big compromise of the d5 square, but maybe it was one of the best bets, or to take on d4 first and then play e5 was probably a better bet than the game. But it seems, who wants to have this allow this stranglehold on the d5 square? It just seems in the game, the game continuation just seems miserable to me. I don't know about you guys. What do you think about this queen c8? For me, this seems like a very defeatist move to play queen c8 here. Even though there's less of a battle on d5, it seems white's just clearly gaining an advantage here. He just simply took on e6, and if, as we saw, if f takes, then there's knight f5 to be factored in using the pin. So he actually gave up the light square bishop, and now, yeah, it just became a very dangerous position for how does black actually hold on to the e6 pawn here. Very difficult. With knight b6 coming in, the queen as defender of the pawn, it's not good. So black losing that pawn, but maybe expecting to have some counterplay at some point. But bishop f5 was a very powerful move. If black wants to play g6, then that diagonal is really quite weak. So this was a mighty centralizing move, keeping control of the position. There's no need here for white. Let's go for an attack. He's won some material, and yeah, maybe, you know, when you win some material, you just want to have more control over the position and prevent the opponent from doing much. That's, you know, basic like prophylaxis. But especially if you've just won a bit of material, you just want to keep control for sure. You shouldn't have to try that hard to win if you're already like a pawn up. So queen d4 is actually, yeah, really quite a good idea. And if the queen was evicted again, then maybe, you know, the queen just drops back to c3 or d2, so it's gained something. But yeah, we saw this continuation, you know, but it wasn't particularly good. This whole idea, the queen, even allowing queen e2 was tolerated and calculated perhaps by Fischer because of these forcing moves, bishop a7 to be followed by rook f2. So he's evicting that queen. And yeah, where else would the queen go here? If the queen went back, then still white would probably just double, and it's a very, very pleasant position. So yes, it seems as though black wasn't given much of a chance in this game. The rest of the game seems like a consolidation exercise, the king coming to the center, and the swap of the d6 pawn for the d4 pawn. But this is a very dangerous and possibly winning pass pawn with good play. So yeah, after rook e2, yeah, Bent Larsen had resigned. So the match score with this win was now 3-0 to Fischer. So he'd continued his massive run of wins. So it been 6-0 against Taimanov, and then this massive run of these candidate match wins. So let's see. in game 4, now, what happened in game 4? Okay, so Fischer was playing black in game 4, and the game kicked off with an English opening c4, actually transposing into the King's Indian defense. So a King's Indian defense, one of Fischer's favorites. Bishop e2, and this is one of the reasons I took up the King's Indian defense. Fischer and Kasparov, it was one of their pet systems. It's not so popular nowadays as, say, the Slav or the Broomfield. So I think the peak heyday of the King's Indian has finished as far as Super Grandmasters, but you know, champions in the past used it regularly as their regular workhorse. So this is mainline classical variation so far. Now here, there's 3 major choices. Bayonet attack, quit b4 for c5. There's knight e1 or there's knight d2. These are the major choices. Knight d2. It's often with this idea of a later c5 and knight c4 at some point to put pressure on this pawn chain here. The exploitable part of the pawn chain, the d6 pawn. So black, he plays actually a kind of prophylaxis against this, preventative action against white c5 and knight c4. And yeah, it's one of the more common moves actually, either to play a5 or c5. Fischer chose c5, trying to restrict black's queenside attack in advance. So c5, trying to close things up there. We have rook b1, again renewing the idea of trying to open things up, maybe with b4 later. Fischer didn't mind that. He starts to get underway with this classic f5 plan. b4, b6, holding steady on the queen side. a4, as though the undermining will continue with a5. Fischer's not too bothered about that. He plays a for f5. We have a5. Should black be worried by the queen side potentially falling apart? It's not too fragile right now. It looks to be under great pressure for sure. Yeah, with this structure here, if white's never getting in c5, is this so dangerous? Fischer plays knight f6, and we have queen a4 now. Yeah, so maybe the queen's trying to get involved in pinning stuff like this a pawn. So a takes b, for example, maybe coming up as an idea. Or maybe this diagonal, pressure on this diagonal. So we have bishop d7 attacking the queen. The queen drops back to a3. Okay, now this bishop can sometimes be a problem. If black played f4, he's hemming in the bishop, and sometimes that's a bad piece later. And one Russian observation about Fischer was that he never had bad pieces. So if you consider that would be a slightly bad bishop after f4, this next move is kind of positional and attacking. He still wants his attack on the king side, but without having this potentially bad bishop. And what he does now is actually bishop h6, which is also another thematic idea sometimes, that you want to get rid of the dark square bishop first before closing things up. On the other hand, sometimes this bishop is useful on the attack on the dark squares. Really depends on the position, but it has been seen quite a lot as an idea to get rid of the dark square bishops first before f4. We have here now bishop d3, and black doesn't really want to play f4 yet. He plays queen c7. You might think doesn't the queen belong somewhere over here? What is it doing on c7? Why didn't the queen go over there? Well, the queen side is under great pressure actually. Let's have a look at this position. Fischer played queen c7, so he's one of the greatest exponents of the King's Indian defense. He knows what he's doing. If queen e8, is that plausible? Let's see, b takes, a6 maybe, with the idea of coming in with rook b7. This might be quite dangerous. If black is not wanting to play g5, and what is queen doing on e8 here, it starts to get a bit dangerous. With this continuation, let's see. If b takes here, takes a6, I think we can, with the queen controlling b7, we can actually play rook ab8 here. This should be okay for black. So yeah, he's keeping the queen, kind of protecting the queen side with this move. So queen c7. White does take on c5, and now actually, so b takes, keeping the pawn chain more intact without giving white a passed pawn. This way is much more dangerous, to give white this potential dangerous passed pawn. And there's also, of course, pressure kept on the backward pawn, so that's one thing to bear in mind. Yeah, structurally it's important to have a pawn chain which isn't subject to too much pressure or leaving horrible backward pawns behind. So b takes keeps the pawn chain more intact without a fixed target on the b file. Okay, now white did play actually e takes f5 here. If white doesn't do that, yes, it's an interesting position. Why did white do that? I think it's actually, if f3, then this bishop is threatening just to come in to here, check, and then come in, like install itself. So what does white actually want to do here? It's tricky, this position, but e takes f5. Okay, takes. Now structurally, this g file could be dangerous. It's just an open road to the king here. I think white needs to be quite energetic on the queen side here, otherwise he could be subjected to an attack. What he did play was bishop c2, which is interesting. Maybe, you know, something like knight b5 is more testing, something like this, to force black to relinquish the light square bishop as one positional concession. And then maybe these pawns are slightly more fragile, and this diagonal generally. But yeah, what we saw in the game was bishop c2, and now this knight b5 is actually deprived with a6. So it's as if there's no real problem now. Well, he's taken out the knight b5 issue, but he's, I guess you could say, b6. It's not a big deal really, the b6 square. If the invasion of b6 is not really leading to exploitable targets. White now plays knight, pardon me, so exploitable targets, a6. We have a very, very interesting move though tactically. This bishop's a loose piece. White actually plays an interesting tactical move in knight de4, discovering an attack on the bishop. So we have bishop takes c1 and knight takes f6 check, rook takes, rook f takes c1. Okay, so here it does look as though this is tempting file just to attack directly the white's king with pretty soon. Rook a f8 for the moment, but the queen is stuck over here. How many moves will it take for the queen to get involved in attack? How will the queen get over here? How? Let's see. Rook b6 invading on that key square which was weakened with a6. Bishop c8 holding the fort here for the entry point b7. d6 is quite held. Maybe the queen can now shift like this. If the knight moves somewhere, then the queen can come to g7 later. Knight e2. And lo and behold, f4 makes way for knight f5, which could let the queen come in to the g file. If white is subjected to that g file attack, this could be quite vicious. Bishop e4. Okay, white has the e4 square, but after knight f5, things are starting to look a little bit dangerous. Things are brewing up here. This sort of stuff is all brewing up against white's king. What is going on here? Is Larsen going to be hacked up? Rook c6, and the queen, which was seemingly irrelevant now to a kingside attack, is coming into her own. Queen g7. Already now, knight h4 is a mate threat now. What about white's queenside? White's queenside attack doesn't seem to have delivered anything in particular. The a6 and d6 seem very solid. As King's Indian players, one is used to the queenside being destroyed, sacrificed to try and get the faintest glimmer of a kingside attack. But in this position, it seems the queenside is solid, and yet black has a raging attack on the cards. Rook b1 was played. So if given a few more moves, maybe this pin would be useful. Maybe rook b6 at some point would be useful. But now immediately black is threatening potentially f3 to interrupt the bishop, and then queen takes g2. So now, and we have this now, queen d3. Already, this is a very, very critical position now after queen d3. I mean, it's a very difficult position. Technically best, this is virtually lost actually now, because the engine suggestion is pretty bleak in actually giving up the exchange here to play something like this. This is a bleak thing which is going on here. If this is a line, it's not particularly hot. For example, like this is actually winning the queen. So that's not a great line if that's the best line. But what was played in this position, queen d3, allows now a very powerful attacking move, bishop f5. So if the queen can be on e4, then f3 will block the queen and hit the knight and actually threaten mate. So that's on the cards. Bishop takes e4 is one immediate threat with the idea of f3, but also slightly more subtly, black is now threatening queen takes g2 check immediately as well, with the idea of bishop takes g2, bishop takes d3, and that will be winning as well. So white played here king h1, and yeah, queen takes g2 is still on the cards as a strong move. That's how strong black's position is. But even stronger now, just f3. So actually threatening mate. White has to defend this somehow. He plays knight g3. This forcibly just loses material now after f takes g2 check. So the bishop's pinned. King g1. Bishop takes e4. Horrible position for white. So if knight takes, then knight f3 check, ouch, is winning the queen. The queen has to give herself up. After queen takes e4, in this position, if rook takes f2, I mean that's even that might be okay. In this position, even this might be okay for black apparently, but no, simplest is what was played, which is just check, get the knight out of danger, to go for this fork. Ouch. So king takes g2, knight d2, forking queen and rook, and here, yeah, white resigned is also like losing f2 after this. So it's a disaster. Yes, if he like tries to protect here, well, actually rook takes f2 first is forcing mate. It's a total disaster for his king side. So yeah, it was a crushing win, ending in knight d2 this game. So Fischer handled this King's Indian defense, it seems, without too many queenside fractures in his pawn structure. He actually kept things very, very solid here. If we have a look at this again, this c5 in advance, just preventing the pawn chain meltdown. Quite often to be honest, I'm playing moves like Knight E8 because I've also looked at modern grandmasters in these types of positions, and sometimes I think I've seen like John Nunn play Knight D7 or Knight E8. These are actually other popular moves to move the knight just like this. But then, you know, you might be subjected, if you play like this, you're often subjected later to a C5 at some point. So yeah, I guess it's like swings and roundabouts here. But the way, so closing up the queen side seems a bit static, but that's the way Fischer played it. He closed up the queen side with C5, and it did really seem like a good advert what he did, because he was never in any major trouble on the queen side, it seems. White didn't really demonstrate a quick breakthrough here. Black kind of remained very, very solid with this structure. Surprisingly so. So another, you know, Queen C7. You don't really think the Queen's going in for the attack later. One thing you might be wondering about is this E takes F5. Well, I have a slight wonder about it. Was this necessary? Because if you look at it structurally, what happened with E takes F5, we had that G file later, which was so crushing. Could White have afforded not to play E takes F5? It's actually it's a difficult position. Let's say if we had moved the knight, maybe just taking here, and then taking on E4 might be a concern. This sort of position is interesting for Black as well. Maybe Black's, you know, going to double just on the F file and have some pressure on F2, so it's not all rosy not taking on F5. So yeah, it seems like, you know, why did White play like this? What a mystery. So G takes F5. Yeah, around about here, it seems that maybe to try and take out the light square bishop was White's best bet. Knight B5, trying to exploit the queen on C7. Maybe this was in fact one of the best ideas going, because sometimes in the King's Indian, if you get rid of Black's light square bishop, you're taking some of the sting out of the attack. But yeah, Fischer prevented this pretty soon now with A6, and we have that B6 square, which it just didn't seem quick enough, this whole queenside attack. Knight DE4 was a neat tactical looking move, forcing basically bishop takes C1. If here, actually in this position, there might be something interesting finally for White. Knight takes this one, and things are getting nasty for Black. But yeah, Fischer bypassed that, just taking on C1. And yeah, he just seems to have a very strong attacking plan. Okay, but yeah, this position here, up to this point, the engine's still giving White with a slight advantage, but it's starting to change its tune after F4. I just think this is much easier for Black to play here. Possibly F4, maybe that's one idea. But even so, this doesn't look too convincing. But you know, maybe this is safer than what was played. If White tries to stop Black playing for F4 here, then this looks like an upgrade on the game anyway, where the game was just a raging attack. So maybe this kind of defensive idea, a temporary pawn sacrifice. But yeah, we have, after this allowing Black this F4, we have great coordination just building up here with Knight F5 and Queen G7. So this Queen G7 is just like becoming an attacking player's dream position. Let's just look at this again. So yeah, Bishop F5, and it starts to be all over pretty rapidly from here. This is like a forced win now already. We're already arrived at a forced win. We're knocked on the door of the king here. F3 is just like a forced win. Yeah, impressive stuff. Now, yeah, I think the first two games were more of a fight than these two, and this one did seem particularly disastrous for Larsen. So he's now, you know, he's 4 games he's just lost in a row to Fischer. I guess the pressure of Taimanov and scrutiny on Taimanov starting to be forgiven. If Fischer can also beat Larsen 6-0, then maybe Taimanov should be forgiven for losing 6-0 as well. Okay, I wanted to do just 2 games at a time actually, just at a leisurely pace. It's yeah, I'm hoping you've enjoyed this little session, which will be uploaded to YouTube. So, and any comments or questions, please leave them on YouTube. Okay. Thanks very much. Okay, see you next week then.